What happens when a nation built on steady energy suddenly wakes up to empty gas tanks?
Picture endless queues stretching under gray skies, frustration boiling over, and streets humming with unrest. This is Belarus, a country teetering on the edge, its lifeblood, the steady flow of fuel, cut dangerously thin by unrelenting attacks on vital supply routes.
Just weeks ago, the unimaginable became reality. Oil pipelines that had carried power and stability for decades were reduced to silence. The consequences? A nation's patience snapped.
For weeks, drivers waited for hours in line, only to find gas stations shuttered. The government called it a temporary disruption, but the crisis lingered, each day deepening the public's fury. Feverish whispers of mismanagement turned into roars on the streets of Minsk and industrial heartlands.
What began as frustration over fuel evolved into a bold defiance, a mass uprising exposing wounds far older than just empty fuel tanks.
Inflation, stagnant wages, and economic decay fueled the fire just as much as the empty stations. Security forces cracked down hard, but the crowds refused to scatter. The cracks were no longer hidden. This wasn't just a fuel shortage, it was a crisis of legitimacy. Belarus, long dependent on Russian energy since the Soviet collapse, found itself trapped. Ukrainian strikes on a series of pipelines, especially the Druzhba line, meaning friendship, ripped through the veins of the country's energy supply. In mid-August, the pumping station in Russia's Bansk corridor was hit, and just weeks later, another critical pipeline feeding Belarus was targeted. The strikes were systematic, not accidental. Each assault drained fuel pumps dry and frayed the nerves of a government clinging to authority. But why does a fuel crisis shake a regime so profoundly?
Because it's more than oil. It's a fracture point, where politics, trust, and daily survival collide. Alexander Lukashenko's grip on power weakens as public anger mounts.
Cut off from alternative suppliers, Belarus can't pivot away from Russian oil without angering Moscow, yet holding the line only deepens popular unrest.
Is there a way out of this suffocating squeeze? Or will these attacks ignite a broader collapse?
The journey into Belarus's turmoil has just begun. Picture a nation on the brink of chaos, where fuel shortages ignite not just cars but a people's rising discontent.
In Belarus, the simmering fuel crisis has reached a breaking point, throwing Alexander Lukashenko's grip on power into uncertainty.
For decades, Belarus has relied solely on Russian energy.
But Ukraine's relentless attacks on oil supply routes have left Belarusians gasping for fuel. The question now hangs in the air: will this disruption expose the government's fragility? It all began on an ominous morning. August 13, 2025.
A drone strike hit the Unicha pumping station in Russia's Bryansk region. This station was the lifeblood of the Druzhba pipeline, a critical artery delivering oil to Belarus.
As flames flickered across satellite feeds, uncertainty rippled through the oil market. Central European refineries faltered under low flow rates.
Just 6 days later, news broke: shipments to Europe had come to a halt. Though flow was briefly restored, doubts about the system's stability grew louder.
By September 7, chaos struck again. Sabotage targeted more crucial infrastructure along the Belarus-Russia pipeline. This wasn't random vandalism, it was part of a calculated strategy. The network depended heavily on Russian crude, with crucial nodes located entirely outside of Belarus.
As the attacks continued, the stability of the regime clashed sharply with the rising fury of the people.
Could Lukashenko maintain authority in the face of such crumbling support and escalating frustration? Meanwhile, the people are left reeling.
The panic at the pumps is palpable, the smell of motor oil in the air. The sound of honking horns echoing through the frustrated lines. Desperation drives citizens to fill their tanks at any cost, creating sprawling queues at gas stations.
Prices shoot up and service falters. Food transport becomes irregular as farmers and parents anxiously assess their options. Daily life frays at the seams as public trust erodes, replaced by anxiety and anger. Initiatives by officials to downplay the chaos only further stoke public fury. Desperate phrases touting controlled disruptions and short maintenance fall flat against evidence of a deeper crisis. Anxious citizens pour into the streets, demanding answers. The mood is electric. Trust has evaporated.
As Belarusians mobilize, the government's legitimacy teeters precariously on a knife's edge, where hearts and minds are lost amid the chaos of fuel despair.
The question lingers: can Lukashenko pivot from loyalty to Moscow to appease a restless populace? Or will the crisis tear open the fabric of his regime, exposing the cracks of dependence and discontent? The next chapter of this unfolding saga beckons as the nation faces an uncertain future, caught between two powerful forces. How will this energy crisis reshape the destiny of Belarus? Previously, we saw how the short-term restoration of fuel flow only deepened doubts about the pipeline system's reliability. Then, on September 7, a critical substation along the Belarus-Russia pipeline was struck. This was no accident, this was a clear, deliberate pattern of attacks. What happens when a country relies entirely on its neighbor's fuel valve? Belarus's costly answer is unfolding. Belarus's two main refineries, Moser and Naftin, have never been self-sufficient. They rely completely on crude oil piped from Russian fields. But here's the catch, the crucial entry points, where oil flows into Belarus, aren't even on Belarusian soil. Instead, they live within Russia's Bryansk corridor, where pump stations and compressors control the flow, like valves on a fragile artery. On paper, backup lines exist, alternative routes designed to keep oil flowing if one part falters. Yet in reality, backups don't guarantee safety. When a node is struck, the backup systems kick in, but at a snail's pace, with soaring costs. As pipeline attacks multiply, the logistics nightmare intensifies. Insurance premiums skyrocket. Shipping fees swell. Waiting times drag on. Belarus is, quite literally, tethered to its neighbor's mercy. Its refinery's heartbeat depends on unseen valves far beyond its borders. And when flames erupt at the pipeline's distant ends, long lines form at local stations. There is no escaping the consequences. The everyday impact hits first at the pump. Prices stick stubbornly fixed at retail, but scarcity sets off a domino effect. With gas access unpredictable, people panic. They fill their tanks wherever a drop can be found, an instinctive scramble that balloons demand and drags queues out onto the streets. City buses slow. Taxi stands thin. Rural deliveries wane. Fresh produce prices jump as cold chains shatter. Parents fret as school buses become unreliable, while farmers crunch numbers over diesel costs. Local governments face swelling fuel bills, forcing cuts elsewhere. You can feel the tension at every gas station, whispered fears, hurried exchanges, the anxiety thick in the air as shopping carts grow lighter online and in markets. This country once gauged its calm by the steady hum of pumps at the station. Now that heartbeat falters, flashing a red warning no one can ignore. If the refinery is the engine, Belarus's fuel crisis is a wrench thrown deep into the gears. What happens next as this fragile lifeline strain tightens? The government's grip is slipping. And the question remains, how long before the whole system snaps? The situation in Belarus is spiraling into chaos. As fuel supplies dwindle, public unease grows, revealing cracks in society. Authorities initially assert that everything is under control, resorting to reassuring buzzwords like technical service and temporary shutdowns. Yet, the reality is starkly different. Satellite images, alarming reports of intense fires at critical pipelines, and footage shared online expose a level of disruption that's impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Just a fortnight has passed, and already, 2 key locations have been struck. The panic is palpable. Long lines snake around gas stations, with customers anxiously filling tanks wherever they can find a drop of fuel. Social media showcases their frustrations, and fuel limits are imposed. Public trust is crumbling, and questions arise: is the government capable of managing this crisis, or is it time to seek answers elsewhere? In this oppressive atmosphere, many young citizens are opting for education and legitimate work. However, those who feel trapped resort to desperate measures, attempting to cross borders into Europe. Reports indicate a dramatic rise in border crossings, as hundreds of thousands seek a life away from the chaos. The situation is further complicated by individuals turning their gaze toward Ukraine, a contentious political move within Belarus. There's an emergence of Belarusian volunteers, particularly within the Kalinuki regiment, highlighting the complex nature of loyalty and ambition in a time of turmoil. These volunteers are perceived not only as actors in a foreign conflict but as potential threats within their homeland. The ramifications of the fuel crisis extend beyond mere inconvenience. The economy teeters on the brink, affecting consumption, tax revenues, and overall production quality. As the regime struggles to keep order, the question looms larger: will this crisis unravel the very fabric of society, leading to a pivotal turning point? The people of Belarus are poised at a crossroads, weighing their options as they look for answers and a sense of stability in an increasingly unstable world. In the heart of Minsk, a fierce storm brewed under the surface as Belarusian volunteers aligned themselves with Ukrainian forces. This movement, particularly centered around the Kalinuki regiment, not only posed a foreign policy dilemma for the regime but also raised urgent internal security concerns. With the nation caught in a whirlwind of tension, files opened against suspected supporters of the volunteers, thrusting families into a pit of fear and uncertainty. The climate became oppressive, pressuring civil society while the economy stagnated, creating a mix of desperation and defiance. As the fuel crisis reached critical levels, long waits at petrol stations became symbols of the broader unrest. A haunting question rippled through society: whose side are you on, and why? The discourse stretched beyond news reports, infiltrating homes, workplaces, and even conversations at gas pumps. As Moscow battled its own fires, it unwittingly cast a harsher spotlight on Minsk, revealing the fragility of the regime. Reports emerged that Belarus's fuel stocks were being siphoned off, with Moscow extracting resources to tend to its own shortages. This alarming diversion not only raised fears about local fuel availability but also fueled feelings of abandonment among Belarusians. The notion of one market, one destiny lost its sheen as people grappled with the stark reality of surging prices and dwindling supplies. Fuel is the lifeline of an economy. Disruptions here send shockwaves throughout every sector, crippling daily lives. Belarus was already struggling with import challenges under the weight of sanctions, but now, logistical costs skyrocketed, leading to rampant inflation. The pipelines supplying essential chemicals and maintenance components grew precarious. With secondary sanctions widening, acquiring these crucial parts became a near impossible task. As pressures mounted and wages stagnated, frustration bubbled over, breeding a profound distrust in the governing system. In this intricate web of loyalty and survival, the question echoed: how long can this cycle of crisis continue before it shatters the already fragile trust in leadership? The struggle deepens as economic pressures tighten their grip on Belarus. Rising costs abroad push up exchange rates and send prices soaring back home. Wages fall behind, and frustration swells. With public trust dissolving, the cycle spirals endlessly. Alexander Lysenko's options shrink by the day. Relying more on Moscow might bring fleeting relief, extra fuel deliveries, emergency cash injections, but the price is steep. Secondary sanctions loom, choking off every last thread connecting Belarus to European markets. Could a gentle shift in policy ease internal tensions and unlock new international support? Maybe. But such a move risks angering Moscow, a gamble Lysenko may not survive. It's a strategic trap with no easy escape. Even warming ties with Beijing offer little comfort. China seeks reliable, inexpensive energy supplies, not the political turmoil that Belarus represents. The government clings to two lifelines: steady fuel at the pumps and rubles flowing into the treasury. But what happens if both betray them at once? The regime's grip could slip through its fingers in an instant. For years, the illusion of stability was held up by everyday calm and affordable basics. Fuel lay squarely at the crossroads of these two pillars. Now, images of endless lines at gas stations unravel that facade. And it's not just Minsk feeling the pinch. In distant towns, transport grinds to a halt. Farmers watch diesel prices climb, each minor disruption swelling into waves that flood markets with uncertainty. The government scrambles with short-term fixes, rationing fuel, controlling sales times, introducing price tiers, even calling in security forces to deter panic. These stopgap measures dress the wound but don't heal it. The real fracture lies in the steady heartbeat of supply and the fragile trust that keeps it beating. A pipeline named friendship now turned into a weapon challenges more than logistics, it shatters belief itself. Citizens no longer see their economy as immune to politics. The blasts on pump stations aren't merely technical setbacks, they strike at the heart of a nation's confidence. When the invisible veins fueling daily life are exposed as battlegrounds in a larger political war, fear and doubt creep into every conversation. What happens when the line between energy and politics blurs so completely that every drop of fuel wears the weight of betrayal? Will Belarus find a way back from this abyss, or is the collapse of trust the first crack in a greater unraveling? The next chapter unfolds as pressure mounts not just in pipelines, but in the very will of a people pushed to the brink. Previously, we explored how Belarus's fuel crisis ripples far beyond the pumps, disrupting supply chains, spiking costs, and straining political stability. The first line of defense focused on immediate market controls and securing supplies. The second relied on transparent financing, cutting freight and insurance burdens, and opening technical channels. Now, the third critical layer emerges, a fragile social safety net. This safety valve means preventing delays in wages and pensions, because when paychecks stall, unrest grows. It means building emergency reserves of food and medicine, shielding the population from hunger and illness amid uncertainty. It means targeted aid for small businesses, like issuing fuel coupons or subsidies, small acts to keep the economic heartbeat alive. Yet, all these measures demand one hard political choice: either cling tighter to Moscow, deepening dependence for short-term relief but risking long-term suffocation, or cautiously nudge open the European door, facing immediate backlash but possibly buying vital breathing room. Which path will Minsk take? The fuel gauge, the lifeblood of the nation, will answer. As long as pumps run dry, loyalty dwindles. How many rubles is allegiance worth when engines stall and queues stretch endlessly? Every explosion at Druba pipeline not only scorches fuel supplies but burns away at the trust binding people to the regime. Black smoke curls over gas stations, nerves fray, and patience snaps. The ultimate trial will begin once authorities declare the crisis resolved. If the pumps flow freely again, if drivers fill tanks without hours of waiting, if prices stabilize, then maybe, just maybe, the turmoil can be tamed. But if the answer is no, the fragile veneer of control crumbles, and the unrest ignited at the stations will spread like wildfire. Because in Belarus, the crisis at the pump is no small matter, it is the crucible deciding who holds power. Remember, what goes around comes around. The question now is, when the smoke clears, will the government hold its grip, or will these desperate days mark the beginning of the end? The answer is waiting at the fuel gauge. And it is closer than anyone thinks.